Early retirement used to be a rather clear-cut deal. You work, throw some money into the S&P 500 or some world stock index every month, then once you have enough, you quit your soul-wrenching job and live off selling stock every year. Simple enough, right? However, this leaves many people struggling to reach that gratifying retirement number. The figures that have become rather popular in the early retirement community are 25 times your yearly living expenses saved up in investments. Fueled by a vile hatred of the corporate workplace and armed with the high income of IT jobs, the FIRE, or financial independence, retire early movement promised people a faster way out of the office, but didn't deliver on that promise for most of us. Even if you earn twice what you spend, you'd need about 15 years to get to your retirement goal, assuming good market returns, of course. But in reality, climbing all the way up to 25x isn't necessary. In fact, I think that it is somewhat dumb. Instead of 25x, saving up only 10x or 10 years worth of yearly expenses might be just enough to get you to retire in a meaningful, albeit not complete way. Let me explain. Let's do some quick napkin math. Say you spend $40,000 a year. Traditional FIRE tells you to save $1 million, so you can safely withdraw 4% annually, while also adjusting for inflation. Sounds great in theory, but unless you start at 22 with a tech salary and no kids, that number feels like a mirage. To put things into perspective, your salary or total income needs to be about twice your yearly expenses or more for this to happen fast, mainly due to compounding interest and a favorable investing timeline. However, if you are lower than that, you are most probably looking at about 20+ years of work and investing to get anywhere close to a full retirement number. Factoring in unexpected expenses, like healthcare crises or emergency costs, the math is not looking very good for the average person. Now consider this. If you've saved up just $400,000, 10 times your annual spending, you could cover the next 10 years without touching a single paycheck. But what if you didn't fully retire? What if you just started working part-time to cover the rest? That's when things get interesting. Enter semi-retirement. Semi-retirement isn't about sipping margaritas on a beach. It's more like sipping tea while replying to 3 emails a day. You still work, just not full-time. You might consult, freelance, or even teach pickleball to other burned-out professionals. The entire idea is to give yourself both flexibility and options in terms of what you want to work. With a 10x cushion, you don't need your portfolio to do all the heavy lifting. You just need it to lighten the load. Even more so, in cases in which things get tough in the market, you can afford to go for 1-2 years of full-time employment again to cover the crisis period. Believe me, working full-time but only for a limited amount of time is infinitely better than having to do so for 20+ years non-stop. Let's say you cut back to working 2 days a week and earn $25,000 a year. That covers half your expenses. The other half? Covered by small, controlled withdrawals from your portfolio. Of course, these withdrawals don't have to be clear-cut either. In some cases, you find that kind of client that you enjoy working with, or a part-time job that is actually cool. In these years, you may only be looking at about 2% withdrawals. On the other hand, when things get tougher on the job hunt, you can afford to get a bit more hefty, withdrawing 8%. As long as everything averages out to no more than 4% per year over 5 years, you should be in the clear. And if not, there is nothing stopping you from upping your hours for a brief while and building back what was lost. The key word in this strategy is flexibility.
This hybrid model doesn't make for great headlines. Guy works part-time and isn't miserable won't go viral, and it's definitely less magic than traveling the world full-time at 40 while enjoying a titanic portfolio that you managed to build while you were young. However, this kind of model is reserved only for those who manage to factor in some early luck in their careers, or for people who sacrificed their 20s to work to the detriment of their personal lives. This is not something that everyone can do, nor should they. Semi-retirement has 2 characteristics that you can't find in the FIRE community. It's effective and it's accessible. First, it eliminates the need to wait until your portfolio is done baking. You're not trying to hit some magic number before your soul gives out. You're saying, I've got enough runway. Let's take off and figure it out in the air. This is the kind of reset that someone with the looming perspective of forever employment holds in their hearts like a slow effect poison. You can never quite grasp the amount of relief you feel, even with semi-retirement, until you've pulled the trigger. Second, you reduce the psychological strain of being fully dependent on market performance. If the S&P 500 tanks for 2 years straight, you still have income. That buffer lets your investments recover without you panic selling at the bottom. This also reduces that need that any investors have felt sometimes in their lives, constantly refreshing the broker app, looking at your numbers and obsessing over the smallest dips in the market. And finally, part-time work lets you stay engaged on your terms. Many people who fully retire early find themselves bored, restless, or weirdly obsessed with their lawn. Working a bit keeps you grounded, and sometimes even keeps the health insurance. Work is something that can be enjoyable if done right. No strings attached, no pressure to keep working in an abusive workplace because you need to pay off your mortgage. If you can give yourself the liberty to work on your terms, tell off your bosses when they cross a line, or even withstand the rather different lifestyle of someone who freelances, you may even rediscover a passion for your profession that was long lost.
We need to stop thinking of retirement as a binary switch. You're either grinding 40+ hours a week or lying on a hammock forever. For most people, neither of these extremes does the job properly. Humans are creatures of balance who enjoy a little bit of everything, as long as it doesn't take over their lives completely. Once we understand this, we understand the idea behind semi-retirement. The new model is more fluid. You slowly phase out of full-time work as your savings build up. You go from 5 days to 3, then maybe 2. Eventually, if you want, 0. Or not. Maybe you find you actually like working when it's not suffocating. Semi-retirement is the middle ground nobody told you about. And with just half or less of the full-fire portfolio target, it's actually within reach for way more people than the traditional path. But perhaps the best thing about this model is that it also allows you to easily transition back to full retirement if you need it to. If at any point you decide that it's time to focus back on those late years where things might get tougher, you can simply go back to full-time employment, scale your freelance practice or business, and add the numbers back up again. Some countries have retirement schemes that pay out after a certain age, or some people have assets that they expect to inherit. For them, this is not such a pressing concern. But for those that do not have these luxuries, it may be worthwhile to think about this aspect as well, especially as the later years draw closer. Of course, within the midst of this entire discussion, there is a question that hangs over everyone's heads. What about risk? The ever-present fear. What if the market crashes? What if part-time work dries up? What if inflation eats your $8 grocery store hummus? These are fair concerns, but not exclusive to this approach. Even those with 25x portfolios face the same risks. There is absolutely nothing stopping the world for going into a full economic meltdown, a case in which all of your hard work becomes irrelevant. The difference is, you're not pretending to be invincible. You build in flexibility. Maybe you adjust your hours. Maybe you temporarily pause withdrawals. Maybe you embrace a small side hustle. The key is optionality, not rigidity. Even more so, on the psychological side, folks who embrace semi-retirement are already prepared for this, while for the others, it always comes as a surprise. We are strengthening ourselves against adversity even before it happens, which will inevitably benefit us when life decides to happen. We've been sold this idea that enough is a fixed number, that if you don't hit it, you can't retire. But enough is contextual. If you hate your job and dread Mondays, maybe the real goal isn't 25x. Maybe it's 10x and an escape hatch. If you resonate with this, the good news is that the hatch is way closer than you may have thought before. The bad news is that there is still work to be done to get there. Semi-retirement with half the funds gives you freedom sooner, lets you breathe, and puts time back in your hands. It may even offer you a different perspective on work and retirement, allowing you to discover that in reality, a little bit of both goes a very long way. There would be nothing stopping you from turning passion projects into income, even without selling every inch of soul left in them to do so. Remember, we are not building a full-time income from it. We are building a new sense of sufficiency. So no, you might not be fully retired by fire standards, but you'll be freer than most people with twice your net worth. You'll be able to shift your work hours to suit your preference, or give up on certain projects when they become too much. And that counts for something. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to my YouTube channel for more ideas on semi-retirement, slow living, and building a life that suits you, not suiting yourself up for a life you don't want. I also publish blog articles on Medium and Substack. The links are in the description. Thanks for watching.